Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, wherever you are. I'm Wade T. Lightheart for the Awesome Health Podcast, and I can't tell you how excited I am today. I am interviewing my newfound friend and really inspirational mentor, Mr. Paul Chek. He's a living legend. A few months ago, we had the opportunity to connect at the CanFit Pro in Canada, where Paul was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award for the incredible contributions that he's made to our industry. And we had a nice connection. He invited me down to the Heaven House in Southern California, which it is the Heaven House for sure. I think we spent over 12 hours together the whole day. We lifted rocks. We looked at how he charges his water. We shared some Native American smoke and which was phenomenal. We broke bread together. We had a beautiful interview together, and we had a really deep connection together. And in a way that I don't know if a lot of people experience in their lives. And I think it may be a throwback to maybe other times or other things when there wasn't so much internet connection and so much, shallow connections. But it was an opportunity to be welcomed into Paul's incredible life and to just get immersed in it for a day, to walk through his library, to see how he'd come to some of the ideas that he'd come up with, and to hear this incredible history of what I believe is a true living legend in our industry. And oftentimes misunderstood, not understand, attacked, and then finally proven true. So what a great opportunity. Paul, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure, man. I'm always excited to get a chance to connect to you and share some love. So thank you.
So let's just, I got so many questions. One of the things that we're kind of free flowers. We like to see where things go and what happens, but let's talk about right off the bat. And this is a really loaded question. Who is Paul Chek and what is his mission in the world?
Well, the truth is the answer for who is Paul Chek is really the answer for all of us. And that is I'm some kind of unique marriage of earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness. But I think a more kind of direct answer is that, when I think of who I am, I really feel like I'm somebody who has devoted their life to seeking truth and sharing what the process and the synthesis of gathering, the many bits and pieces of scraps that you have to get in this quest for knowledge and truth, to test them and synthesize them into what seems to be universal principles or consistently reliable ways of perceiving and relating and engaging the world. And as you know, my life has been oriented around two things: health, which includes physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health, and what really is true fitness. What's, functional fitness or baseline fitness, functional fitness, and then sport or activity specific fitness. And how do you get somebody from the state that they're at walking in the door to first physiological and structural balance, to then build them up to be the person that their dream is requesting of them. So really that's sort of an encapsulation of who, I perceive myself to be.
And the mission through the Paul Chek, you have the Paul Chek Institute. And that's kind of a branch of expression for you. I think you're much greater than the Institute itself. It's kind of like, but let's talk about the Chek Institute, because of all the industry professionals I've met, and I've met a lot of the big names and all those, been to the seminars and all that sort of stuff. You're probably one of the most, I would say, subtle influencers of movement concepts in the world today. In other words, if you kind of dig down into communities and cities, or you go around the world, sooner or later, you end up with the Paul Chek practitioner somewhere who figures out the unfigure-outable.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Paul Chek Institute, what that's about, and why people seem to, what's interesting is so many, when I talk to Chek practitioners, what's fascinating is they kind of go on this journey of health and fitness and study and education and learning, and they come from a sport or an activity or whatever it happens to be, or an institution or a profession, and somehow they wind your way into the Chek Institute, and then they become Chekies. You know, that's what the world knows about. They become Chekies, and they dive into your world. What is so powerful about the Chek Institute, the Chek principles, and how that's just permeated the whole world with some of the best coaches in the entire world? How did that come to be? Because that's an incredible accomplishment that needs to be acknowledged and recognized. How did that happen?
Well, it happened really right in the beginning of my military career as the trainer of the United States Army boxing team. And I didn't really realize how much that I had learned in my childhood, both on the farm, my mother being a yogi for, 30 something years, traveling to India to do initiations multiple times, being raised in the Self-Realization Fellowship temple and teachings of Yogananda. Being a child, there was a lot of stress in my family, so athletics was how I vented that. And I love to win. I just really have, as a young man, winning to me was important, because I figured if you're going to do it, then why not just go for it? And otherwise, why bother? Go do something that's non-competitive. But so I was very immersed in sports from the first grade. I started with wrestling and pretty much just played everything I could play, any excuse to get off the farm so I didn't have to work, shoveling piles of shit and cleaning pens and, all the worky stuff. But, I was in a small valley on Vancouver Island called Comox Valley, and it's intense, pretty heavy winters there at times. Our first year there, we had 8 feet of snow. So for a kid from Los Angeles, that was quite a shock. We had a 140-acre sheep farm. It was a working farm. So between my pursuits as an athlete, and because the competition there was just so many great athletes there, it was crazy. I mean, growing up, one of my buddies he was my sparring partner for 3 years in our boxing club. He became the world champion in kickboxing at the time in 86, I think, maybe 89, he became the world champion. Another one of my buddies that I grew up with in town owned pretty much the only gym in town at the time. He was Mr. Canada in bodybuilding in 1989, I think, as well. Two of my other buddies were nationally ranked motocross racers that I did a lot of racing with. Probably 6 or 8 of my best buddies were black belts and multiple level black belts in various forms of martial arts. And we had our own kickboxing club where we had weekly meetings to destroy each other. And a lot of my buddies were elite skiers. So it was just like this hotbed of farm boys that all had this need to express their frustration and father stress, and also were also very motivated to win. And so it created this intense growth pressure. And so I began studying when I was 12, everything I could find on diet, weightlifting, bodybuilding, and just apply, learn and apply. And so when I got to the Army boxing team, the strange thing was I was also the Army's representative in triathlon. And so the boxers and the team management were kind of baffled by the fact that, we often train 6 hours a day on the Army boxing team, And I would be getting up early in the morning to do longer, more intense running, like, 10K and half marathon type training fairly regularly. Plus I would go to, when they went to lunch, I would go to the swimming pool and usually put a mile in and just get some food in me as quick as I could. And then after training, I would get on my bicycle and go do anywhere from 20 to 60 miles in the evening. And I'd do 100 milers on the weekends. And they could not figure for the life of them how I could possibly, and I fought on the boxing team before I became the trainer. So they were watching how I was very good as a fighter, but I was also doing all this intense training. So when my company commander came to me and said, if you want to leave the boxing team and train full time to win the Army Triathlon, I will support that because I got a lot of money bet on you. I need you to win. And so I went back and told the boxing team I was going to stop fighting and train full time for triathlon. And they said, oh God, don't do that. We'll give you the job as trainer, because whatever the hell you're doing, it's working. You can fight hard all 3 rounds. The way you eat, the way you train, we've never seen anything like it. How would you like to become the trainer and take over all the conditioning, management of the gym, and nutrition coaching for the boxers? And I said, something inside me just knew that was what I was supposed to do. And fortunately for me, the team physician was an osteopath, and he was quite open to discussing things with me. So I got a 2-year internship in how to care for acute sports injuries. And we had plenty of them because the boxing gym was also the headquarters for many Army sports, such as powerlifting, track and field. And I was interacting with wide variety of athletes. And there's at that time, there was 79,000 soldiers on Fort Bragg. So it's like being in I grew up in a town of only like 16,000 people. So there was like, being on Fort Bragg was like being in a big city on Vancouver Island. And so I really got to use my creativity, what I'd learned about weightlifting, what I'd learned about diet. The first book I ever read in my life, I hated reading, but the first book I ever read, I finished it in the Army on a bus on the way home from the Pentagon, where we had just done a 10-mile inter-military race, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. And it was Nutrition, a Holistic Approach by Rudolph Ballantyne. So I had really gravitated toward these holistic principles because that's how my parents ran our farm. Everything we ate pretty much came off the farm. My mother, being a yogi, was very oriented toward natural eating, which is heavy in Yogananda's philosophy. We bought food that we needed when we needed it from a local kind of hippie co-op where people got together and got good food. And so, plus being raised on a farm, my father was a very intense kicker, get the job done, no complaints, do it or you won't like the consequences. So I really learned how to push through discomfort. I mean, doing things like swinging axes for 8 hours straight and clearing land and, building and digging fence post holes and a long string of endless stuff. So I actually got in extremely good physical condition. And so when I carried that into sports, it was already like I had a lot of preconditioning. So I was almost a jump ahead of a lot of people. And so when I got in the Army, it was really just, without a depth of knowledge, anything even close to what I have now, it was really, and I'd also been trained by the monks to meditate and how to, calm my mind and how to, find my center in the middle of a storm and how to understand concepts such as what the universe is or what God is or what space and time are. And so when you put all that together and you put me on an Army boxing team where I become the trainer, I had the freedom to implement weightlifting and circuit training. And I used to be an aerobics instructor before I joined the military. So I used that knowledge and skill. I began modifying their diets because they ate like crap and just ate crap and had a lot of problem losing weight and doing a lot of stupid crash dieting and just silly stuff, using various drugs to accelerate kidney urine production to drop weight, the stuff that really cost them, So when I put all this together, and long story made short, as a triathlete, I was in so much physical discomfort from the hard training that I had the experience of my grandmother massaging me when I was a child. I had asthma, and none of the drugs or anything did anything like my grandmother's massage. And so when I came to the situation where I was training so hard, I was just really in need of massage, I asked my wife if she would give it a try. And so I just got some, like, you know, baby oil or something. And even with no skill, the difference it made in my training was phenomenal. I was just blown away at how much it aided my recovery. And so I started reading sports massage therapy books and everything I could find on sports massage therapy. And I intuitively implemented this on the Army boxing team. So I became the first person ever in the entire history of the boxing team to offer massage therapy to all the fighters. And so between the massage, the diet, the designing the conditioning programs, and I led the fighters through the workouts. I didn't point fingers. I did everything I asked them to do, which they loved and they hated, because I was in good enough shape to really, you know, put it on them. And it just grew into this sort of excitement, this passion, because the team doctor reported within about the first 3 months that the rate of injury was going down like he'd never seen it. And the athletes were performing far better. They were fighting way harder and longer through the third round, where they were having problems with that before. Just there was so many positives. And my father was a guy that did not have the good job gene. So to be in the military and to be winning so many awards, I set many military records, got 2 records in the obstacle course in different posts. I set the record for the most push-ups in 2 minutes in the 82nd Airborne Division. I got many, you know, Army achievement medals for various things that I did. And so I was in this sort of like very inspirational hotbed with very highly motivated men that were, you know, really aggressive, get the job done, kick ass, let's win. And then having that team doctor, Charles Pitluck, there started opening my technical awareness. And then I started reading books on sports medicine to understand the body from a medical doctor's perspective and how they treated inflammatory problems and tendons. And so that kind of triggered me to the point that when I left the Army, I knew that I wanted to mix conditioning, sports massage therapy, postural awareness. I went to the Sports Massage Training Institute, which was phenomenal. And I eventually got my license as a holistic health practitioner, which allows me by the state of California law to do anything holistic with any kind of problem, from psychological problems to health problems to whatever. I can do massage, I can do meditation, I can do plants and herbs, anything that's natural. So it was the perfect license for me because there was really like almost no barriers on it, you know? And I just continued to study and travel all over the world and learn from the very best doctors and therapists I could find, no matter where they were at. And I put that all together. And having left the Army and starting my own sports massage business, I then got hired by the largest physical therapy clinic in San Diego that had their own surgical center. So I had 13 orthopedic and neurosurgeons I was working with. I could go to surgery anytime I want. I ultimately did 5 cadaver dissections, 2 through the University of Oregon Health Sciences University, 1 through Guy Voyer, and multiple through the surgeons, because they did regular cadaver dissections to test new surgical techniques and just to review their anatomy. And then working with all these physical therapists and athletic trainers gave me a chance to share concepts with them. And the reason I got hired is because the owner of the clinic had had 3 knee surgeries and was about to have a 4th because her knee locked up and she had a frozen knee for the 3rd time. And the surgeon said, if I have to manipulate this knee, you may never be able to play golf or tennis again, both of which she was very active in. So I had rehabilitated a guy named Kevin McCary, who was on Nike's running team then. It was as a marathoner, and he had bilateral Achilles problems that, you know, pretty much were ending his career and nobody could figure him out. I straightened him right out in about a month. And so he told the owner of the clinic, before you let them operate on you, you got to go see this guy that I know. Long story made short, I got her more range of motion in 1 session than they'd been able to get for her in months. Then she asked me to come work for them. I was the first massage therapist in San Diego ever to be hired by a physical therapy clinic. And because the physical therapist always thought of massage therapists like prostitutes, so it was a bit of a shock for them. And then she asked me to condition her, because I got her range of motion back, but once I started working for her, she asked me to condition her. And there was a lot of political tension because there was a lot of looking down the nose at me, and there was also a lot of jealousy, like how did this guy with no college degree figure out this woman when we couldn't figure her out? So there was a lot of kind of edginess, you know. And so I said, why don't you let them work with you? And if they give up or you give up, then I'll take it over, because then whatever happens will be respected, knowing again that they did their best. And sure enough, after about 3 months, she wasn't getting better. She was getting worse. So I took her over, rehabilitated her, got her strength back, got her where she could play golf and tennis again. And so that triggered off a level of mutual awareness and respect that led to me spending 4 years being treated pretty much as an equal, because they had evidence that I was certainly able to do things they couldn't do with their degrees and their skills. And so that just catapulted me into a deep, deep exploration of everything to do with the body, the mind, the soul, the glandular system, the organ systems. And I basically became famous for the guy to send medical failures to. And I had doctors from all over the world sending me cases. And I ended up working for many professional sports teams. I did a lot of consulting for the Chicago Bulls in the Jordan era. They were the first ones to take on my Swiss ball and my scientific core conditioning approach. And it spread wildly from there to other sports teams. The Lakers were the ones that picked it up next from them. But I've worked for so many professional sports teams all over the world, and so many sports, Olympic committees, university teams, militaries, you name it. And, you know, the reason I kept getting jobs with these people is because I got results that they could not deny. And I've taken 3 elite athletes, famous athletes, out of medical retirement that were forced into medical retirement, all of which came to me. And I completely rehabbed them and got them in very good shape. And they all passed their medical exams, which is extremely rare, because if a athlete goes back after being forced into medical retirement, they can actually sue the team for falsely retiring them. So Gary Roberts, I rehabilitated because Charles Poliquin came to an impasse with him. He passed his medical exams, which I had to attend because the doctor was very concerned about letting him back with all the problems he'd had. But he ended up making $25 million more before he finally retired. Ricky Stewart, at that time, the highest paid rugby player in the world, was forced to medical retirement. I brought him back and he played for 2 or 3 years after that. Richard Dunwoody, a famous horse racing jockey, was forced into medical retirement after 40 bad falls from horses racing and being trampled and all sorts of stuff. And he had some severe issues, but I rehabbed him, and he went back and won the Triple Crown and wrote about me in his autobiography, and sent me a beautiful big picture, which you probably saw on my wall, and a copy of the autobiography to say thank you. So really what kicked off the Chek Institute was it was really Charles Poliquin. He was a friend of mine, and I helped him get more known in the US. He asked me if I could help him get a job with the Bulls. So I inspired Al Vermeil to bring him on and consult with him at the Bulls. And Charles asked me if I would train his top 2 strength coaches in the approach I use for assessing core function and optimizing core strength and conditioning. And those 2 guys, who are very, very experienced strength coaches, said what I was teaching was just like so far outside of anything they'd ever seen or heard of, that they really both felt I should start an institute. And so at that time, I had enough knowledge that also, after I left Sports and Orthopedic Physical Therapy Clinic, me and a partner started our own physical therapy clinic. And prior to that, I was working for a chiropractor for 2 years, who was one of the instructors in my massage school. So by the time I actually started the institute, I had 2 years training with an osteopathic physician in the military, sports massage therapy training, holistic health practitioner training. I did my neuromuscular therapy training through the St. John Institute. I had So then I worked for this chiropractor for 2 years who specialized in athletic injuries. Then I worked in a physical therapy clinic for 4 years. Then I owned a physical therapy clinic for 3 years. So by the time I actually got to where I was training Polikin's people and starting my own institute, I had quite a lot of experience, and I'm, you know, I did a lot of research. I published a lot of articles. I've published hundreds of articles around the world. I was involved in developing research studies. I've got several patents of my own, as you know, as an inventor in medical and exercise equipment. And I come from a background of fabrication, building my own race cars and roll cages and building my own engines. And so I have the skill to kind of see where there's a hole and fill it. And so the Institute was really me taking all the knowledge that I had from each of these different areas, be it nutrition, lifestyle issues, musculoskeletal issues. I had to do a lot of work with people's mental emotional state, because a lot of the people that came to see me were in severe pain and had been for many years. And I found over and over again, there's a huge psychological component in chronic pain. And all my assessments kept pointing to belief systems. And so I kept running into issues where people's problems tracked back to beliefs that were related to their beliefs about God. And fortunately, my mother, having been a Christian Scientist and become a yogi, gave me a chance to really heal a lot of that Christian programming and be able to spend time. I spent my 15th year in summer camp with the monks, where I could ask any question I want. And these guys were so enlightened and so clean and clear and precise in their answers that even as a 15-year-old kid, I actually turned 16 in summer camp, I felt safe, and I felt like I was getting real, honest answers that carried me through the rest of my life. And so the Institute really became the place where I took everything that I had tested for years and years, and I had a very, very busy practice. I mean, I got so busy in the physical therapy clinic, we had to hire 3 other massage therapists to support the load. And I was referring the largest physical therapy clinic in San Diego, 36% of their business just from people trying to come find me from all over the world. So by the time I started the Institute, I had traveled all over the world, studied with many great doctors, therapists, teachers, and had enough clinical time to integrate, master the Swiss ball, develop the first conditioning videos in the world for Swiss balls, introduce them to the weightlifting industry. I developed my primal pattern movement system. You know, so I had enough that I was getting encouragement from 360 degrees to teach this stuff. And I also reached an intense level of frustration with the insurance industry, because they were ripping us off so bad that we couldn't run our physical therapy clinic and make a decent living, because they kept sending us like $16 on a $135 building, or 40 bucks. And so when the opportunity came to sell it to a large corporation, I took that money that we made, because we made a couple $100 grand, and I split that with my partner and used that money to start the Chek Institute. And so that really just became the basis from which I launched off in '95. And that's what I've been doing, is just continuing to study, learn, practice, grow, work with challenging cases. You know, and I've also got my license now as a medicine man and spirit guide. So I finally reached the point where, when I started doing research on psychedelics and did a year of training with a doctor that uses them in his practice, Penny felt it was very important for me to get federal protection so that I didn't get sued or anything like that. So I went through the Native American Council and got my medicine man spirit guide license, so I can use plant medicines legally in healing ceremonies. And I've conducted over 400 healing ceremonies at this point. So, you know, the plant medicines also grew me more than anything, I would honestly say, more than any books or libraries, and helped me heal, you know, potentially lifetimes of pain. And also reinforced my meditation and Tai Chi practice. And I spent time with Master Fong Ha, learning from one of the top masters in the world how to do Tai Chi. I took medical Qigong training and applied that. And I did a lot of that as research for my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, because I felt that people were so burnt out from working too much and exercising too hard in the gym that I needed to take exercise into its feminine expression. And so I hired Master Fong Ha. Well, actually, he did it for me for free, but I offered to pay him. And I told him I want to learn the basic principles of Tai Chi so I can develop a system of movement that actually cultivates more energy per unit of time than it costs, that allows people to pump, detoxify, and vitalize their bodies, but doesn't require the memory of a lot of complex Tai Chi movements. Because I'd met people that had been in Tai Chi for 2 or 3 years and still couldn't get out of their head. They still couldn't meditate. They were so focused on where their hands were, where their body was. And so I said, they've intellectualized Tai Chi too much. So after 2 years of working with him, I had developed what is in my book as zone exercises. And through testing with my patients and students, they got phenomenal results with these very simple, mindless techniques, because they locked onto the very principles that really all the inner arts are based on, but allowed a person to move dynamically so that heady people could actually be engaged in the movement. So there was just enough for the ego to focus on to keep it busy. And there was simple enough movements that the ego kind of goes into this half awake, half asleep state where the meditation bridge opens the doors. And so kind of believe it or not, that is a nutshell. But so that's what really brought the Chek Institute onto the map. And I've had so much success with elite athletes and sports teams that the word just spread. In fact, the New Zealand military sent 2 of their top guys to study with me for 4 years to revamp the entire New Zealand military's conditioning programs. The Navy SEALs sent 3 people in, 2 of which went back to rehab Navy SEAL conditioning. I've had all sorts of kind of unique opportunities like that due to the reaches of my articles and my successes.
Incredible. So the Chek Institute, I guess, will be coming up on 25 years next year.
Yeah.
Done that, which is pretty impressive. One of the things that strikes me is you live your principles and you're in incredible physical condition.
Not bad for an old guy.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't revealed your age. I don't know if you reveal that or whatever, but, we went out and we're lifting rocks on your property. And what's very interesting, I think, is one of the unique aspects that I've noticed with the Chek Institute and what you provide is, and maybe this, because we kind of shared some stories about our past, which we grew in these environments where you're not sitting in these wonderful linear planes that are familiar in most gyms that people go to or exercise programs, is there's a functional level of strength and a functional level of movement that you have. And it translates not only into your physical condition, but your capacity to move, particularly as you age. I doubt there's most 20-year-olds could do the things that you do now today.
Well, a lot of them try, but they soon find out that the old man's got a surprise for them. In fact, one of the most common things I get accused of is using anabolic steroids. And I look at them and say, you obviously know nothing about steroids, because I'm a 170-pound guy. I have no indications of steroids. I said, the steroids I use are chicken, carrots, broccoli, real food. And yes, so for the listeners, I'm 58, and I still regularly put it hard on young professional athletes that seek my coaching. And even guys that can lift more than me in the gym, when they come out to the stones with me, they can't get things off the ground that I can stack chest high.
Yes.
And they all go, how in the friggin' hell did you just do that? And I say, well, you first got to connect to the stone and ask it if it wants to take a ride with you.
So one of the things, and there's a promotion of it, we'll probably put a link to it as well, I think that was really good, that's kind of summarizes your journey. And I thought something that was pretty unique that you mentioned is that when you coach or train a Chek practitioner, you have like 5.5 years for them, or I believe you mentioned on that. Can you can you talk about what it is to be a Chek practitioner and maybe the levels and what happens when, how does a person become that? How do they move through it? And what is the foundational components that being a Chek Institute practitioner is? What does that mean, as opposed to, say, getting a degree from University of California, or taking an international certification course or provincial course or a state course? What is the difference between what you do and what other people do?
Yeah, well, the difference really is a bunch of things. One, my institute is multidisciplinary. So we have many medical doctors, nurses, chiropractors, osteopaths, physical therapists, physiotherapists, napropaths from Scandinavia. We've got housewives. We've got people that, used to be truck drivers who a Chek professional rehabilitated. People of all walks of life, and they go, oh my God, I've got to do this. This works so well, I got to do this. And so, if it's out there, there's over 10,000 Chek professionals now. So my only criteria is that you can pass the prerequisite courses. I don't care if you're a truck driver, a logger, or a surgeon. And I don't make any exceptions. I've had many people say, can I skip this prerequisite because I studied this and this in school? And every time I've let someone do that, they turned out to be a royal pain in the backside in class because they were way far behind what should be known. Cheers, by the way, some nice tobacco and herbs to share with you.
Can you talk about right now, because it's kind of a good segue, I got to experience some of your smoke concoction, we'll call it. What is it that you're doing, and why are you doing it? I think it's interesting.
This is a bag of vaporized herbs, so there's no fire. It's a copped up food dehydrator. It was invented for medical marijuana delivery, many years ago. And it pushes hot air through a little basket that contains herbs. And I use clean tobaccos that are not grown with chemicals, so I don't get poisoned by them. The grand majority of which are certified organic. And then I use a variety of herbs. So any tea that you can drink, you can vaporize, and it does the basic same thing. So if you drink a sleepy time tea and you vaporize it, it'll make you sleepy. If you drink ginseng and it warms your body up, well, if you smoke it, it'll do the same thing, but a lot faster. Within 3 seconds, it'll be.
It's a superior delivery system, right?
It's a rapid delivery system. But, what happened is I research all this because I'm very interested in all aspects of holistic health. And so when I went through my midlife crisis when I was 50, I realized I had given so much of myself away that I was dying from a lack of pleasuring myself, doing things just for me. Mm-hmm. And so I made a promise to myself, if I couldn't make my work enjoyable to me, then I wasn't going to do it anymore. I was just going to retire and go do something else, like paint. Start a rock gym.
Right.
And, but you can use vaporized herbs to modulate your biochemistry, just like you can use any kind of supplement. And so I typically, because I do a lot of writing and a lot of coaching, I use things mostly that bring me more into a sort of a meditative state where I'm walking the line between cognitive engagement and intuitive reception. So I'm listening behind the words and I'm connecting to the person's soul while I'm coaching them. And if you're busy or if there's a lot going on, sometimes it's hard to shift into that balance point, just like it's hard for people to stop everything and meditate. And I found using the herbs that I can choose the right herbs to create the environment. So I basically, in modern parlance, I'm biohacking in a very natural, organic, holistic way, not using gadgets per se, but using herbs. And because you're using a vaporizer and there's no fire, you're getting, I estimate, only about 30% of the nicotine. So I smoke these things all day long, as you know, and I can go off of them cold turkey. And I basically just feel tired for about a day, like I'm jet lagged. And then after that, there's no symptoms whatsoever. Whereas if you were smoking tobacco, you could get very addicted to nicotine. So I also use it as a transition tool for people to come off of various drugs, because I work with a lot of addicts, from crack cocaine to pain pills to if there's an addict out there, from gambling to sex to exercise to work, I've worked with them. And so I find this approach is such a much healthier option, and it allows a person to use something to modulate their biochemistry and create states that help them realize that there's much safer ways to create state shifts. Because what I've found working with thousands of people is most people are actually suffering from a lack of meaning and being caught in the capitalistic money wheel, where they're just running all day to make money, overspending on credit cards, trying to pay for kids, colleges, whatever it is, and they don't have any chance to live. So they end up getting addicted to things that help them cope with that stress. And the deeper, our culture has lost its myths. So everybody's kind of like wandering around in the great abyss of the world without really having a sense of why we're all here, what we're all doing, and what's it's all for. And then you have consumerism has taken over as the myth. So people are spending so much money trying to find this connection that we've lost by being too disconnected from nature. So this allows me to take nature and put it right in my bloodstream and celebrate and worship. This is a ancient, as you know, practice of ceremony for Native Americans and natives all over the world. And, I sort of live my life in a state of worship. I really, each day is sort of a living prayer for me. And so I use these herbs as a vehicle for deep connection, state shift, and just to create the sense that I'm not working so hard. I can stop, go smoke a bag, work, write. It just brings me a lot of joy. Yeah,
it's I was my first time to share in that when I was down there, and it is remarkable how it is you say as a state modulator. I think it's pretty fascinating, and it feels great. I'm pretty intuitive about myself. It doesn't feel like taking something bad into the body. It feels there's definitely a positive enhancement and a cognitive enhancement for sure, and a state enhancement that I experienced. And I think it really translated also in our podcast as well. When we were talking there, I noticed there was differences in my voice and how I sound, and it's fascinating to pay attention to these things. Going back though, I know we got a little sidetracked here on this, and because that was an interesting segue. But let's talk about these preliminary courses that you have people to go through before they get to maybe the more advanced training, and why that's so critical as a foundational piece in the Chek Institute system and philosophy.
Yes. So when I began the Chek Institute, there was 4 levels of training. I grossly overestimated how much people could handle. So I used to have, veteran physical therapists and chiropractors breaking down in tears in my class and just throwing their hands in the air and walking out, or writing me letters. They would just disappear and leave me a letter saying, I'm so embarrassed that I feel like I'm so far off the mark. And I had no idea there was exercise professionals anywhere in the world that had this level of knowledge. And so I realized I had to break the course material up and build prerequisite courses to get them ready for it. And there's a fair bit of technicality. There's a lot of goniometric assessment, joint assessment, neurological assessment. I mean, it's a full, proper orthopedic assessment, cranial nerve assessment. I mean, I really want to identify what's causing a person's problems, not just do allopathic palliative care, because it just doesn't really work, obviously. We look at the state of the world. And so originally, the plan was it would take 4 years, because I designed the system so you'd take a block of training, then you have to go spend at least 6 months applying it, and you have to turn in. I used to require 10 actual case histories with names and phone numbers I could follow up on, which I graded myself. And I wouldn't let anybody go to the next level if they couldn't meet the criteria to demonstrate that they were applying the assessment techniques, the program design techniques, and all the factors I was teaching them. And I was heavy into the diet stuff, but there was so much to teach in the science of corrective and high performance exercise that what happened is, after a few years, I kept having all these students consult me with the cases that they were having a hard time with. And almost always it was some kind of glandular, visceral, or diet and lifestyle problem that they were overlooking, which I already did, but couldn't put into the program because it was just a massive other field of study. And so ultimately I decided I had to start what was then the nutrition and lifestyle coaching program. So I put together a 1-week intensive course, which, you know, sometimes the classes would go 10 hours a day because there was so much to teach them. But I found that almost everybody that was coming to the classes were very, very unhealthy people that wanted to go out and tell other people how to get healthy. And then I put together the next level, which is now the 3rd level. And they would show up again looking just as bad, yet they'd spent months telling everybody else what to do. And that goes completely against my philosophy. So I said, okay, that's enough of that. So I took out the most basic elements, what was in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, plus a few other more practical application concepts. And I built Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, which is specifically designed to teach all interested people how to achieve baseline health. And it's the prerequisite to get into HLC2, Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 2, which is my holistic lifestyle coaching program to teach you how to do it professionally. And HLC3 is the advanced training program where I go into much deeper issues such as infant development, a much more comprehensive approach to gland and organ reflexes, medical dowsing. I take them through a system of maps I developed to show them what the life process is and how to identify where a person's at in their stage of life. What are the challenges with each stage of life? I show them how to do a personality profile so they know how to better coach people. So it's a very comprehensive course, but once I started making people do HLC1, I noticed they would show up much healthier. And I mean, I've had people lose 90 pounds between taking HLC1 and HLC2, and I've got loads and loads of, you know, mind-boggling case histories. And then they were ready, because you can't coach people effectively if you're not actually having visceral knowledge of what it's like to kill parasites or do heavy metal detox or colon cleanses, liver cleanses, kidney cleanses, you know, all the things that they were prescribing to other people. These things can be quite intense, and there can be, you know, complications. I remember one time, for example, I was, you know, years and years ago, I had a guy who was a medical drug salesman, and he had a bad case of parasites and his intestines were very badly blocked up. And I had put him on a colon cleanse product with antiparasitics. And all of a sudden, one day I got a phone call in the clinic. I can't remember his name, but they said, you know, so-and-so needs to speak to you right now. And oh, by the way, he's quite upset. So he's calling me on his mobile phone. And this is right back in the very beginning of mobile phones. And he's like, what the hell, man? He says, you didn't tell me what was going to happen to me. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I'm actually sitting in traffic right now, and I just my pants, and I'm on my way to a very important meeting. And he says, like, I've got a whole seat full in my very expensive BMW convertible. I am sitting in a pool. And he says, I thought I was just going to fart, and this happened. He says, why didn't you tell me? You know, and you know, I had had experiences like that, but I only highlight that because if the practitioners don't realize what they're getting a person into, they don't know how to pace them. And there's a tendency to throw everything in the kitchen sink at people. So you got people doing this drug, those herbs, that supplement, and they're like, they don't know what the f going on. And so I really felt it was very important for people to do everything to themselves that they were going to prescribe to other people. And then I would, you know, I was trained in functional medicine testing, and I worked with one of the giants of that in the world who actually invented salivary testing. And so having done a lot of this on myself and realizing, wow, you know, you go too fast with a heavy metal detox, your life will be very short for a few days. Mm-hmm. It can completely sidetrack you. So what happened in a nutshell was I grew the corrective and high performance exercise program, and I built a lot of prerequisite courses to make sure whoever walked in that classroom had the anatomy, the physiology, and the basic sciences down, and it was graded tests. And then I found that they could digest the information much better. And through constantly seeing all these people failing with diet and lifestyle factors, I realized I had to build that training program. And then because there was so much mental emotional factors, right? The diet and lifestyle factors, well, when you say, well, why do people keep doing that, right? You ask people, I ask people in large audiences all over the world, mostly doctors, therapists, and strength professionals. How many of you right now know you're either over exercising or under exercising, but keep doing it? And almost every hand goes up. How many of you know you need to get to bed earlier than you are, but you keep staying up late at night and it's costing you? Almost every hand goes up. How many of you know you're eating that messes your body up, but keep doing it? Almost every hand goes up. How many of you are doing jobs that aren't making you happy, but you're telling yourself you got to do it for money and it's causing problems in your own sense of self and in your relationships? Almost every hand goes up. So the point I'm making is, and this basically is based on my 4-doctor model: Dr. Happiness, Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, which is the encapsulation of a living philosophy. If you don't have those 4 doctors, believe me, you will be spending a lot of time and money on medical help. And so what I showed my students, because they're the ones too that I would ask these questions, is you all are aware intellectually of what your challenge is, but you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, which means you have to look at the beliefs that are driving your behaviors. Mm-hmm. All actions are the result of some kind of belief, most of which is unconscious, right?
This is the tricky part that people get caught in this. So keep going.
So what happens is, think of how many times, yourself or myself or anybody reaches for a food that they know is going to cause them problems, but do it anyhow. So then I say, okay, well, why do you keep doing that? I look at myself, why do I do that? Well, I can tell you, for me, again, it's almost always because I spent so much of my life helping other people. I need something that is gratifying, something that's out of the box. And paradoxically, because it's taboo, even if it's your own taboo, if I eat that, it's going to make me itch, or it's going to give me pimples, or it's going to make me feel like shit. But I'm going to have real fun eating it, or I'm going to drink that. I'm going to get drunk. Even though I got to go to work tomorrow, I'm going to drink, and I'm going to drink till I don't anymore. Or I'm going to smoke, or I'm going to do this, or drugs, or whatever. And so what you see is that there's an unconscious cage that's been built. And that's been built largely out of mom's ideas, dad's ideas, the educational system's ideas, all of which are built on religious ideas.
Right.
So without going into a long expose, which I could easily do, as you know, but the reality of it is 85% of the people in the world claim religious affiliation. That means 85% out of every person you're ever going to see as a therapist, coach, doctor, trainer, whatever, has religious programming, usually starting right from childhood when the mind is wide open and has no defenses. And so what you see is the so-called commandments turn out to be perfect to pit you against your instincts, your sexual instincts, your instincts for food. Religions have restrictions on sex, restrictions on food, restrictions on dance, restrictions on music, restrictions on clothing. I mean, the list is long. And so everybody's got this idea in their head that they have to follow these rules because this is what God wants, and if you don't do it, you're going to burn in hell, or whatever the story might be. And so at the basis of all this, and this sacrifice yourself, give everything up, Jesus gave everything away, there's these kinds of themes, especially in the Abrahamic religions, which is Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. So I kept running into all this over and over and over again. And so I would ask people questions, and each question would lead to another question. Okay, why did you do that? Because this. Why did you do that? Because this. Why are you staying in the relationship when you're unhappy? You've been married for 20 years and you just told me you weren't even happy after the first year. Oh, well, because in my marriage vows, it's till death do you part. I don't want to burn in hell. So, okay, so you think God wants you to live in a relationship where you're not capable of sharing love when your own religion says God is love. So what I found over and over again is that the root of all these unconscious beliefs, with a small amount of exceptions, are religious ideas. And I get atheists that say, well, that doesn't apply to me. I don't believe in all that. I go, yeah, but you're raised in a school system that's based on Christian ideology. Your road names, your holidays, almost everything that you do in your life is linked to Christianity in this country or in Europe.
And I found with a lot of atheists as well, many who I think are in extremely integrous people in my experience, but their beliefs are actually a reactive response to
No.
that programming, and they're caught in the trap again because
Yeah.
they're still out of tune with their essence, essential nature. And not to jump the gun here, but how is it that you've been able to kind of move through not just an exercise philosophy or a way to live, or kind of a way with, 4D living, I believe is what you term that, the 4 doctors strategy. Yeah. How is it that you've been able to kind of deprogram that spiritual kind of misdirection that people find themselves caught in, and synthesize that in their physicality? Because as you know, at the highest levels, when you really get to the end of the story, it breaks down to these subconscious, archetypes and programs and patterns and behaviors. Yeah. And when you change that, then everything else just seems to fit. How did you get to that point? Because it's very rare that people in the exercise game, if you will, or the fitness game or the performance game, in their career, actually go out there on a limb and speak so forthright about those principles and how they fit. And that's, I think, one of the key aspects that makes you so unique, is that you're not afraid about making these statements. You're not afraid of talking about great spirit. You're not afraid of talking about the psychological components of how you move and how that translates. How did you get to that particular place?
Well, quite frankly, I had to go through it myself.
Right.
When my mother became a yogi, at the time I was 12, but she'd been going to a Christian Science church, and I found it absolutely confusing and scary, because here I am as an 8-year-old kid being told God loves you, talking about angels and heaven. And the next thing you know, we're singing Onward Christian Soldiers marching off to war with the cross of Jesus going on before. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm really confused here. And every time I would try to ask a question, I would just get told to be quiet, or, treated like a prisoner of war or some damn thing. But then
I have to say, sorry to interrupt, but it's so interesting, because I had the exact same realization when I went from Sunday school to the big church. And in Sunday school, it was Jesus loved me and everything was great. And I thought this was a great thing. And then I go to church and the guy said, well, if you don't do this, you're going to be thrown into the pit of fire and burn in hell forever. And I was like, what happened to the loving God?
Totally.
I remember having this conflict, like, this is crazy. Somebody's got this picture wrong. Is he a psychopath, or is he a loving God? Like, why is there this dichotomy? It drove me crazy. And of course, the Yogananda helped resolve that for me. He had a beautiful explanation about that. And of course, he influenced your life as well. Continue on, though. I just had to make that little segue, because I share that same realization.
I totally appreciate that. And it's as common as white bread out there, especially for those of us that have enough self-esteem to say, wait a minute, I've got to take charge of my own inner life, because, waiting for somebody to fix me is really dangerous. It's obviously not working for everybody else to do that. The only answer you get is, you have anxiety, or you have depression, or you are bipolar. They come up with all sorts of fancy names to push you into a box and give you a drug. And usually it's downhill from there. But, really, for my own journey, and which is, like I said, my style is to really penetrate myself and try to find what is it that I've got to heal. And once I've healed that, then, as I'm sure you know, once you heal something inside of yourself, for example, if you heal yourself of gluten intolerance, the next shopping mall you walk through, you see everybody's gluten intolerant.
Yep.
You see it everywhere. If you heal yourself from a sacroiliac joint injury, and you know what it looks like, then you see them everywhere. So whatever we heal creates vision. And so as I spent time with the monks and learned these concepts and saw the stark contrast between Christianity and yoga, I'm like, wow, this is like gnarly how lost and confused people in these Abrahamic religions are, and how their model of God is really so far from God. It's scary, really. And it starts wars. It's, religious differences are the number one cause of wars, which is the number one cause of death on this planet. And so a couple of steps happened. One, I had to work with myself. Two, after my first marriage of 17 years, we were together from the time I was 16. My son was born when I was 18. He's 40 now. I realized I could not be in a monogamous relationship, because the pain of wanting to cheat to get laid and have the ability to share intimate connection and love with females, yet being not able to do that due to religious ideology and preconceived notions of, you know, our marriage vows. And she was in the same boat. We discussed it a lot. So after I got a divorce, I said, okay, I can't be in a relationship with a woman that wants me to be monogamous. So I spent a lot of time exploring and being very forthright with women, saying I'm not cut out for monogamy. I did it for 17 years and it left both of us in a state where we didn't feel whole or complete. Now, remember, I was a young person. So, you know, my son was born when I just turned 18. We were together since I was 16. So I didn't really have time to go out and kind of sow my oats and play the field. So I had that part of my life missing. So when I, long story made short, when I met Penny, I just said to her, you know, when it was obvious that we were, you know, serious together, I said to her, I can't be in a monogamous marriage. It doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means that I have to have the freedom, because I never want to be dishonest. It's my heart hurts too much to tell lies to somebody that I love. And she was happy with that. And she's European. So, and she doesn't have kind of a lot of these shackles on her that a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. And so we just basically made the agreement that we stay together and live and love in ways that work for both of us. And our marriage agreement was, as long as we're happy together, we stay together. But the day that we realize we don't want to be together anymore, then we move on. So Penny and I gave each other the freedom to be who we are. And that allowed me to explore intimate friendships, I would call them, because I really never had any intention of leaving my wife. I love her way too much. And this process allowed me to actually find out that I still had a lot of Christian programming alive in me that I didn't realize. For example, I'd be making love to another woman, and all I could think of was, oh my God, I'm cheating on Penny, you know, and all this stuff would come up. Like, where's this coming from? I'm being completely honest. I'm not going behind anybody's back, this, you know, but I realized I had all this programming in me. And so I had to really work on that. And then when I began my training in the use of psychedelics in 2006, oh my God, many of the journeys just brought all sorts of this childhood programming up, and I had to come face to face with it. And so what ultimately this process led me to was when I bought Carl Jung's collected works maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and I've been studying it ever since. And I studied many of the great minds in psychology, depth psychology, Ken Wilber's works, and many of the Sufi masters. And what I did, I studied Joseph Campbell for many years and still do. I began to understand what an archetype was. I studied Carolyn Meiss's survival archetypes. I studied the shadow in psychology. And so I also studied attachment syndromes, infant attachment, and how we develop a secure bond with our parents and what drives an insecure bond. I studied Dan Siegel's works, and I studied how to use an adult attachment interview, and I developed my own adult attachment interview so I could identify when there was attachment problems in the beginning of a person's childhood. So I studied world religion extensively for years and years and years so I could understand each of the kind of mindsets and ways of relating to the world. I studied Houston Smith extensively. And so what synthesized out of that was a system of analysis that I teach Chek professionals, where we look at your attachment history. What was your early childhood like? And we have a comprehensive questionnaire that shows us where there's problems. We look at, I created a system called the Big 8 archetypes. So we look at the Imago Dei, which is the image of deity. What do you believe God is, and how is that helping you or not helping you? We look at the mother. How's your relationship with your mother? The father. How's your relationship with your father? We look at the child. What was your childhood like? Then we look at the saboteur archetype, the victim archetype, the prostitute archetype, and the eternal child, which means anybody that's avoiding adult responsibilities and taking responsibility for their choices, but they should be because they're in an adult role or at the adult age. And so using that system, and I also have people fill out their health appraisal questionnaire, which analyzes 29 physiological systems, all the glands, all the organs, and even issues like anxiety and stress. And plus I have a physical examination that's very comprehensive. So by the time I put this all on the table, I know what archetypes of the survival archetypes, where they're victimizing themselves, where they're prostituting themselves, which is working for money, not for love, doing things that they shouldn't be doing because they don't like doing them, but they think they have to do, where they're sabotaging themselves and other people, where they're avoiding the responsibilities of being an adult, which is most people in Abrahamic religions. As Osho says, Abrahamic religions are religions for children. Eastern religions are religions for adults, because in the Eastern religions, there's no big daddy in the sky that's going to rescue you or tell you what to do. But in the Abrahamic religions, you always have to follow rules, and there's an old man in the sky. So that it's basically really what I would say is a breakdown of our mythic evolution. We're still stuck in needing this sort of, Zeus-like figure to tell us what to do and what's going to happen and ...
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes, as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others, is a total game changer. Suddenly, you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with Masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
Basically, what I do is I identify where they're at, what is the response to their body from the contents of their mind and their emotions. I do a complete injury history, so I know every injury they've ever had, physical, emotional, or mental. And I created what's called an injury tree, so I can see the chronological history and how their body responded over time. I can see things like their education and how that influenced them, what their religion or lack of religion is. And then basically what I do is I craft a plan, and depending on the mindset of the individual, I either start them, if they're very trapped in religious ideologies or isms, then I know I need to connect to them through their body first and get results with simple things so they learn to trust me, because going deep into the psyche like that requires tremendous trust in your guide. If they're ready for it, I will give them the nutrition and lifestyle coaching, but simultaneously I will take them into, whether it be Tai Chi, Qigong, medical Qigong, breathing exercises. But typically what I do is I start with the religious blockages by doing a very simple thing. Because I've found that you can find the truth of spirituality and religion in any of the world religions. You just got to get out of the corporate religions and study the mystics of that religion. So as a general rule, if the church wanted them dead, they're good teachers. That's how you know who to read.
Yes, let's play the highest stakes game. I think that's a really fascinating insight, because having such a wide dearth of physical experience with people and teaching them all these different components as you have, and then going into the psyche and the spiritual psyche or the consciousness realm, and actually seeing the correlation between the two items I think that's maybe one of the key elements that makes what you do so comprehensive about how do you not only just know what to do from a A to B instructional component of physical or practical components, but understanding why you're not able to do that, or why you're having a challenge making a shift. Because isn't that really, I mean, there's no shortage of dietary advice or exercise advice and all this stuff. The problem is adherence. And adherence comes because of these patterns of thinking or being or things which are indoctrinated or taken on or traumatically imprinted into the person. And if you can't do that, all the training and help, I mean, how many professionals have you met in your career who are extraordinarily brilliant, but aren't able to adhere to their own principles, or suffering extensively?
Yeah, extraordinarily brilliant and brilliantly fucked up.
Yeah.
A lot. In fact, having taught, I'm one of the few guys that's taught in medical schools, osteopathic schools, physical therapy schools, chiropractic schools, dance and movement education, massage therapy, strength training, and I've been at the highest level. I've been keynote speakers at major musculoskeletal medicine conferences, golf, all over the world. So I've been inside at the elite levels of all these different fields and seen how most of the leaders of these organizations are highly intellectual people that are actually still suffering from their childhood wounds and have the kind of religious confusion. So that was one of the things that really, reinforced to me that I really had to study the psyche, because healing has to begin with coherence. One has to have a genuine, authentic willingness to change. I tell people, if you can't change, you can't learn. And if you can't learn, you can't change. And if you can't learn and change, you can't grow. So, there's a whole other aspect, which is the ego, and the whole problem with the ego and false beliefs about the ego, and learning how to understand the ego and how to identify what is authentically the self versus the false self or the programmed self, which is what we're talking about, all this programming. But it was, it's been a very, very interesting quest, and I'm still learning a lot. I mean, I still learn, the more you learn, as the faster you can learn, because you've got a bigger database, so you can make connections and patterns.
You can integrate with other
and you just get better at it. You learn how to learn. And so I've really, come to realize, for example, that all addictions that I've worked with, which is a lot of them, are genuine attempts to find safe love. That's what everyone's looking for. They're looking for a God that can dance, as Osho says. They're looking for a partner that will love them as they are without trying to control them, which is extremely rare. They're looking for teachers that have, genuine knowledge, wisdom, and empathy and compassion for them as a student. They're looking for bosses that won't beat them up. I mean, all of us are really inside. We're just little children trying to figure this grand mystery out and trying to find a safe passage to meaning. And it's very, very rare to get the kind of love and support that you can get from monks, for example, because that was like the most healing thing I might have committed suicide if it wasn't for those monks. That was so distraught. My father drowned when I was a kid. My father left my mother with 3 kids by the time she was 18, and she was stuck. My stepfather was highly abusive and scary as hell and dangerous. I was worked like a slave dog and never got much time to do anything but work. I had to take on the adult responsibilities from the time I was about 10 years old, or even 8, working, driving tractors and, things that are, you really got to focus, because if you screw up a tractor, it's bad news. And
it's correct.
So what happened was I lived through all this intensity, and I saw, and when I studied addiction very extensively, I came across Angelise Arian's work, who is a phenomenal anthropologist and a real shaman. She traveled all over the world looking to identify what are the actual causes of addiction. She went to 160 different countries. It took her 10 years to do all this research. And when she tabulated her research, she found 4 things kept popping up over and over again. And they were the common things that in every culture led to addiction. Intensity, being raised or living in an environment that's too intense for us to really engage without it being so stressful it starts to break us down. Well, look at the violence in families, especially religious families. It's shocking, right? Basil van der Kolk's work just is shocking when you see how much violence there is in households, and sexual abuse and emotional abuse and mental abuse, and how many teachers really don't even enjoy their work and don't connect to their students. So first you have intensity, and there's no order to them. They're just the four correlates. Then you have the need to know. Well, think of how many of us realize right away the teacher's pet gets a lot of favors, does better in school, and is way better off than we are because they can pass tests that a lot of us that are kinesthetically oriented or auditorially oriented aren't oriented to. Then you look at the learning system, study Howard Gardner's research on how the mind actually learns, and you find that 98% of all academic systems are set up in the mathematical logical learning style, which is only appropriate for 8% of the world population. Mm-hmm. Right? So most of us go to school and we might be athletic geniuses, or we might have great artistic ability or musical ability, or have the ability to put things together and be carpenters, mechanics, or dentists, or electrical engineers, but we're not really ideally designed to read and memorize. And so you see tremendous amounts of stress based on this idea that the more you know, the safer you are and the better your life's going to be. And so we have a whole world full of people getting advanced degrees that ultimately don't help them very much at all. Research shows 50% of people are not even working in the same field they were trained in a university within 5 years of leaving the university, which is not a very good statistic for education. So this perpetual need to know, it's one thing to want to know because you want to explore the mystery. It's another thing to need to know because you think your survival depends on it. When you come home from school and you've got, C's or D's, and your parents get out the ruler and start whipping you for it and take free time away, so you can solve. It's very clear that the need to know becomes a tremendous survival tactic in our culture. And a few years ago, I did research. The highest rates of teenage suicide were in Japan and New Zealand. They tracked it right back to scholastic pressures. Japan and New Zealand have two of the highest standards for high school graduation. And when they found out all these kids were killing themselves because they felt inferior to their peers, it became evident that we have a real problem in the education system in these countries, and our country is very much the same. So you've got intensity, the need to know, focusing on what's wrong. Well, how many of our parents and school teachers and educators spend more time focusing on what's wrong with us than what's right with us?
It's interesting. I kind of reminds me of one of the things with Coach Belichick of the Patriots. When he assesses talent, most of the teams assess talents about, okay, well, the guy can't do this, or he can't do that, or he can't do this. He has a different way of looking at it. He looks at, well, what can the person do, and how can we integrate this into my offense or to my defense or to my special teams? And he builds systems around what people can do as opposed to what they can't. And it's interesting that what you identified here in the difference between being a human knowing and a human being.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we kind of celebrate the human knowings as with degrees and climates and these type of things. And then there's the human doing. The human doing is the person who's so caught up on the hamster wheel. They're doing, but they're never being, and they might not be knowing. And then there is the human being, which is kind of the master between knowing and doing, and is integrated into a form of being. And, spending time with you at the Heaven House, it seems you figured that out in a really beautiful way for you and how you live your life, which is certainly, I think some people would say would be way outside of the norm.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yes. And I say that with all due compliments, because I think as a contrarian myself, by nature, I was always looking at society and saying, well, if 95% of the people are doing, it's probably the wrong move. If you look at where the end game of where people end up in life, And I thought, so let's start with the opposite and see if we can go anywhere. So we were kind of talking when we took a little break there for a second about, the integration between the knowing, the doing, and the being, and how you've kind of synthesized in that in your life at this point. What role do you think your study into psychology, Native American medicine, I don't know what you call it, medicinal traditions,
Yeah.
and I would say psychedelic therapy, which you advocate. How did those kind of come into your life and kind of augment what you had been doing in the past? Like, I'm very curious about that, because I love the fact that you speak openly about it. And thanks to podcasts, there's an expansion of this awareness of these traditions that have been practiced for thousands of years in communities, which are, have profound impacts. And you've been able to kind of systematically integrate this into your whole way of being, your whole education, and how you help people kind of become clear, if you will.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. My father, if you saw my biography, you saw pictures of my dad, you could see he's got jet black hair, and he actually looks like he could be an Indian. And we were told, my father had no brothers or sisters, and neither of his parents, we didn't have contact. His father, which is my grandfather, died in the Second World War in Pearl Harbor. And so I never got to know my grandfather, and his mother gave him up to be raised by another woman who was pawned off as his grandmother. So long story made short, I had no way to track our family genes. There was no 23andMe or any of that, but my father told us that he was Cherokee Indian, that his father was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian. And it just turned out, when I joined the Native American Council, conversations with Claude Pyler, the chief, I said this to him because I didn't know any different. He said, well, it's interesting because when they used to take all Cherokee government had the last name Cherokee. So if you were in the Cherokee government, you were called so-and-so Cherokee.
Oh, interesting.
And he said when they put Cherokee Indians in the military, they often shortened that to CHEK, which is my last name. What that did when my father died is it left me with this burning desire to know more about my heritage. So my brothers and sisters and I spent a lot of time, and my mother too, reading books on Cherokee Indians, Native Americans. And so I have a whole section in my library, like probably maybe 100 books on everything to do with Native cultures. I studied numerous documentaries on it. I've got countless books on shamanism that I've studied, and courses and things that I've done. But when 23andMe came out, we found out that we had only like 1 or 2% Cherokee Indian in us. And I had some Jewish in me. I had my grandfather comes from Alsace-Lorraine, and I had a lot of my genes come from the region of Alsace-Lorraine between France and Germany. And so I had a bit of a hodgepodge, and we're all like in shock. Like all our life we've been taught that we were Cherokee Indian, and now we realize it's wrong. But what happened was, kind of interestingly, is it made me very interested in these cultures. And when I looked at what was going on in the world and compared it with how they lived, I'm like, well, Christ, it's pretty freaking obvious what's going wrong here. We've fallen in love with science, and we're not wise enough to look at the ramifications of the application of using oil excessively and ... right? So then when I looked into native approaches to healing, there were, and I had a pretty bad break when I was 15. I was cliff diving, and long story made short, I ended up hitting a ledge. You have to run real far to clear about a 20-foot granite ledge at this place. But people come down the river on inner tubes and kayaks and stuff. So you had to have a spotter, because there's a hard 90-degree turn right before this place called the deep hole, where it's deep enough to jump in from 35 feet up. And it just so happens I was running full speed, and they screamed at me, stop. And a inner tube with about 6 people was coming on, a tractor inner tube. And the timing was I was going to jump right into that inner tube and probably kill somebody, because I'm coming from almost 4 stories up in the air. So I tried to stop, and it was wet, red clay. And I got to the very edge and I couldn't stop. So I just jumped as hard as I could. My right leg cleared the ledge. My left leg caught it, and it broke my ankle. in 5, and my tibia and fibula in 5 places, and I had a massive compound fracture. And so the first thing that happened, because my father and mother's business was a woolen business, and most of our customers were native Indians on Vancouver Island, who bought our wool to make sweaters and gloves for the tourist industry. And so one of my mother's contacts, she told about what happened to me, and she said, get him on comfrey tea right away. We call it bone knit. And I was on comfrey tea like several times a day. We grew it right in our garden. And after my 4-week checkup, the doctor took x-rays and he goes, what the hell's going on? He said, I have never seen a fracture this bad heal that fast. He said, you're pretty much ready to have your cast come off. So already, between the way my mother already lived and having an experience like that, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of power in nature. And even the doctor himself is blown away. He could have never given me anything to create healing like that. So I had these experiences. I'm being brief because there's been a lot of them. You know, my grandmother massaging me can take my asthma away, but nothing else. The inhalers, the pills didn't do near as good as my grandmother's loving touch. My mother being very grounded and you know, looking, and my mother was a Christian Scientist, so they didn't believe in medical doctors and standard medicine. So everything was kind of done naturally. And, you know, unfortunately, sometimes not too wise, because one time I broke my wrist doing bicycle stunts. My parents wouldn't take me to the hospital. And it ended up being my baseball coach, because I was a star baseball player. And when I was out, I couldn't catch a ball with my left hand because it hurt so bad and it was all swollen up. He looked at me, he said, you got a broken wrist. He said, I'm going to take a risk and take you to the hospital. He says, I'm not supposed to do this, but you clearly have a real injury here. And sure enough, I had a badly broken wrist. So, you know, having come from this sort of this natural roots, for better or worse, gave me an exposure. And then when I started studying holistic health and I read Rudolph Ballantyne's books and books like Paul Pitchford's Healing with Whole Foods and Bernard Jensen and, you know, Paul C. Bragg and studying all the old bodybuilding magazines, which were completely different than they are today, the healthiest, wisest people that I could find were living close to the earth. The smart guys with, you know, their fancy cars and white jackets were usually sick people. There's an old saying, dead doctors don't lie, right? The average doctor dies 10 years earlier than their average client. And people say, well, it's a stressful job. I say, well, yeah, well, that means you should do a better job of taking care of yourself then. Mm-hmm. But so all these basic principles I kept running into. And so ultimately I learned through a lot of experience, there's a time and a place for medical drugs, but first do no harm, which is Hippocrates' primary dictum. So I always believe starting with the least invasive approach and then working up from there toward the drugs and the surgery, which are inevitable for certain cases. And I found that most of the people that go the drug route are too lazy or have too much mental emotional blockages or self-denial or self-judgment to want to actually participate in taking care of themselves. So they've been taught by the medical system, which is really a bunch of priests in white jackets, to the word treatment means somebody's going to do something for you. So we have a treatment model where people have been trained by the American Medical Association to sell their problems to a doctor or a therapist. And they believe that if you pay X number of dollars that you should be able to walk out without your problem. And so what I saw is the whole medical model is suffering from the treatment concept. So I built the whole Chek Institute on a coaching model. And my motto is, we do not treat diseases that have people. We coach people that have acquired diseases. So I really say, you know, learn what you need to learn about the disease process your client has, not because you're going to address the disease, but because you just need to know what drugs they're on, what the physiological changes are, how that affects digestion, elimination, metabolism, assimilation. But ultimately, we are going to coach the person that acquired the disease, because all cells want to be healthy, and there's more technology in a single cell than we have in our entire medical knowledge. And so what I found is if you give the body what it needs to heal while you're addressing the mental, emotional issues that are perpetuating high levels of stress beyond what would be there if they had a more balanced and better understanding of what life's all about and weren't running from a mean God or working in jobs they didn't want to be in or staying in relationships that they weren't happy in, that you can do miracles with natural approaches. And I studied Hippocrates, and he only used 40 different herbs. He had a medicine ball that was made out of a pig's bladder filled with sand. And the things that he was doing today would be hard to do. Then you got Galen, who was, you know, couple thousand, over 2,000 years ago, was the doctor for the gladiators and never lost a single gladiator in the 2 years he was the physician for the gladiators, which today, if we took American doctors to work for the gladiators, if we started that same thing up, there's no way that would happen. Mm-hmm. So what you found is these guys had enough anchor in real things like rest and stretching and breathing and working with the mind, because we had a very strong spiritual tradition. Remember, we had all the Buddhism, remember all these things we call Taoism and Buddhism, they were alive and well in those eras. Mm-hmm. So, you know, all the things that we think is really cool, like mindfulness today, that was just normal for these guys. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we think this is all new stuff. It's not. It's old stuff re-emerging. You know, you could say it's the spirit of the earth trying to heal us before we destroy ourselves. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is I found that the most powerful medicines, and in fact, as a side note, if you study the history of medicine, most of the drugs that we use today actually were stolen from shaman and medicine men in native tribes by drug companies who then patented them and mm-hmm. never gave the natives a dime, and then go trounce the rainforest looking for all the supplies so they can then make their drugs. But most people don't realize that they're actually practicing synthetic shamanism. I say, why not go for the real stuff? Mm-hmm. Right? So at the end of the day, what I found is if you get clear on what God is, so you can get rid of all that silliness, you know, and that's another conversation, but really in a nutshell, God is unconditional love. I mean, God is the source of everything. Everything that's happening is God experiencing itself. And the answer is always yes. Unconditional love never says no, because that creates a condition. So we all have free will. We all have the opportunity to say yes or no to this food, this job, that partner. It's just whether or not we have the spiritual courage to be true to ourselves. So once you kind of get a person to the point where they can actually understand the majesty, the mystery, and beauty of life and really celebrate that and be honest about what really fills their heart. You know, Dr. Happiness is the doctor of being clear on what is happy making for you and scheduling it into your day or your week so that it's not a wish, it's a reality. When we eat according to natural principles and we pay attention to what our body's telling us, because it's always telling us, you know, most people just ignore it and drug it or drown it with alcohol or whatever they got. If we rest when we're tired and you know, follow the cycles of nature, and we move our bodies when our bodies tell us to, right? People ignore that all the time at great peril, or they overmove them because they're chasing after, you know, some need of acknowledgement or recognition, or like I was trying to get strong enough to take your father out for your fear of your own family, for your own family's protection. But once you heal that stuff, one, you find that you don't need powerful synthetic drugs very often. I mean, I can count the number of times I've used medical drugs on, you know, 2 hands, and that's it. And I've been through some really, I mean, I've had surgeries and stuff from racing motorcycles and all sorts of bad accidents where I had no choice. I woke up in the hospital, didn't know how I got there. But I haven't missed a day of work in 35 years due to illness, because I do Tai Chi. I practice breathing. I meditate on an almost daily basis. I do meditation in the evening in my infrared sauna to close my day, and I do Tai Chi to start my day. I have a spiritual practice. I eat organic whole food. I exercise effectively. And I really do what I love to do for a living, and I give my life in service to helping others have the chance of experiencing what I experience. Because just like when you've gotten over gluten intolerance, you know how terrible it feels to be gassy and bloaty and feeling like a foggy head all the time. Well, naturally, you want to tell the world you don't have to live that way. So really what's driven me all these years is I kept running into all these athletes and all these people that were broken and sad and confused. And a lot of the stuff was stuff that I'd already worked through. So I said, we'll try this. And most of the time it worked. And so it's sort of like a snowball that just kept rolling. And, you know, as you probably know, I was promoting all sorts of stuff way 20 years ahead of it. I was doing food intolerance testing before anyone even knew it was out there. I was doing, you know, I introduced the concept of the Swiss balls. I was one of the first guys in the world lecturing on functional exercise in this era. Everybody was using machines. I was giving them very scientific research showing them that is not a good idea whatsoever, especially if you're a rehabilitation specialist. I developed the primal pattern movement system. You know, I was teaching people cold showers and ice bath therapies before Wim Hof was even a name we'd ever heard of. I mean, there's a very long list of things that I pioneered. Not that I pioneered them or invented them, but I found them in other traditions and tested them, and they worked very well, and they were very non-toxic, mostly free, easy to use. And I built my life around those principles, and I saw when people don't have those principles, what they do have is a lot of medical bills and a lot of stress in their life, and they spend a lot of money on things that ultimately aren't helping them. In fact, they're usually driving them deeper into the problem.
I want to be mindful of the time here.
Let me throw one thing for
you.
Please
do.
The fourth cause of addiction is perfectionism. So we covered intensity, we covered the need to know, focusing on what's wrong, but perfectionism. And where does that come from? Mostly religious families trying to make sure everybody fits the code, the clothes are right, the hair is right. You know, Puritanism. We're still suffering from a puritanical view, which is, you know, still medieval religious ideology, and all this comparison and, you know, needing somebody else's approval. But the problem with a perfectionist is they always need someone else's approval, and you can't get everybody's vote. So perfectionism is a trap. And the problem is something that's perfect doesn't move, so it can't evolve, right?
The not good enough syndrome that plagues so many people today.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there because I could feel people going, what is the fourth cause of addiction?
It's so true. It's always a timeless kind of experience. And I think that's one of the interesting components of you is, you know, you're a visionary, but you're an integrator and a synthesizer. So you're able to synthesize the essence of a lot of things and then integrate them into a collective philosophy that has been broken down in a series of stages that you teach your practitioners and your students how to apply this in a way that makes sense with whatever they're trying to do in the world. So what would you comment? I'd like to, because you're generally way ahead of your time, and that's been kind of the source of, I think, your expertise. Where do you see the world today, and what do you see happening over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years inside the health industry, inside humanity itself, and inside our education systems? Or what would you like to see happen, I guess, and what you're kind of representing? I think that's really important to see. Where do you feel the train going?
Well, I think the Hopi prophecy is really the answer to your question. The Hopi prophecy is basically shows a diagram that they left painted on a rock. And they said, based on analysis, experts who look into these things have said, the Hopis said we were right now where we're at. We in their drawing, it shows a line going off, and then it comes to a dead stop. And there's another line with some words written. And basically, the other line keeps going all the way around the rock. The line of advanced technology brings the world to a dead stop. We destroy each other, and we destroy the planet. The other line is basically, as the Bible says, the meek shall inherit the earth. The other line in the Hopi prophecy says, if we realize that we've got to change, and we change fast, and we get back to supporting the planet and realizing we cannot survive without her survival, and therefore nature's healing, cleaning the oceans and cleaning the waterways and cleaning up the use of energy and going to free energy technologies is essentially what we've got to do. because if we don't support what supports us, then we're going to run out of everything. Right now, almost every water supply in the world is poisoned badly. The air is badly poisoned. We've lost more topsoil. We've lost millions of years of topsoil from commercial farming. The average commercial farming family completely ruins 7,000 acres of topsoil in the life of the farming family. All the way back in 1961, they said that something like 60% of the US farmable land was destroyed from excessive tractors and chemical use. So without a long expose on that, we're at a point right now where we have the emergence of energy medicine. We have homeopathy. We now have the quantum technology. We can take a medicine and imprint it right into water, and it'll be just as effective as the medicine, which the medical industry is fighting like hell, because it means it'll wipe out chemically based allopathic medicine, and billions and trillions of dollars will go down the tubes if that happens. So they're trying to stuff all these technologies, but obviously they're coming out because there's too many scientists now breaking out of the mold and saying, we can't do this anymore. There's too many intelligent people warning that we're heading for a dangerous situation. And it's pretty obvious. I mean, we're at a real tipping point with many, many systems that are nearing collapse. Just to give you an example, I recently had a research paper forwarded to me by Dave Murphy, the founder of Food Democracy Now!, which was one of the first organizations ever to successfully sue Monsanto. And his research that he sent me was from entomology journal. Excuse me, not entomology, the Science of Bugs. I'll remember the name of the science, but it's the science of investigating, insects. And they showed that the scientists all over the world that monitor this stuff were showing there was tremendous reduction in insect traffic all over the world. So a bunch of them worldwide got together and they started doing a long assessment to see what's actually going on. And they showed that we are now 75% reduced in insect traffic in only the last 50 years. And wow. They stated Armageddon may be near, right in the title, because the sex organs of nature are about to collapse. Steiner warned that human life depends on two things, bees and trees. Well, we've almost wiped all of them out. And there's massive die-off with bees everywhere, and they've tracked it back largely to the use of pesticides and electromagnetic pollution and irritation to the bees' navigation systems and things like that. So really, we're at this point right now where one of the things we've got to do is switch to free energy. We've got to go to zero-point energy, and the technology's been around. Tesla developed it. Others have. I got a library full of inventions and stuff. We have all the technology. It's the big corporations that don't want it to happen because they're going to lose too much money. But if we make the transition to free energy technologies, that'll take a huge burden off the planet. It'll free up all sorts of stuff. And if we go to energy medicine and we ride this emerging wave of I hate to use the term, but new age psychology and spiritual development, it's really helping us realize that the battle's on the inside. It's not the outside. Looking at your shadow, doing the healing work, getting into a world religion belief system instead of ethnocentric, my group against your group, and realizing the unity that we all have. We're unified by the earth. We all have to have the earth to live. We're unified by the solar system and the galaxy, and therefore the universe. There's massive amounts of science on the mind, like One Mind by Larry Dossey, showing that there really is only one mind. We're all just agents of conscious process within the one mind. So once we realize that we're really all the universe experiencing itself, and that we've got far more to gain by supporting each other, and that we can celebrate the beauty of each of the religions, but we can also identify where other religions have, shall we say, an upgrade in software, and give each person or each group or each culture the space to practice in a way that it wants to celebrate life, but learn what is it that we can get from the Hindu religion? What can we get from the Jewish people? What can we get from the Native Americans? What can we get from the pagans? What can we get from, the Celts? The Celts have an amazing spiritual philosophy. And that's all happening because the internet's allowing us to talk to each other without distance travel, like we are right now. And so we're at this really powerful, Carl Jung said, no man is truly alive until he has the power to destroy himself. And we do. We've got enough nuclear weapons to destroy this planet 179 times over, ready to go at any minute. One more world war and we're all dead. So we're at this point where we have enough experience of what doesn't work. And we have enough experience that science is a double-edged sword that's very dangerous. We have to be careful what we call science. And scientists have to become moral. They've got to be concerned about the effects of what they're putting into the environment. If we all wake up, which we need to do quickly, and start caring for the planet and start practicing 4 doctors and 6 foundation principles. My 6 foundation principles are nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement. If we realize that's the basis of life and none of it can happen without the earth, and we all need each other, and we stop playing all these border games and kind of living like Donald Trump and realize that we're all a world community and that we need Mother Nature and all the insects and the birds and the bees. We need the great chain of being to be healthy because it is us. Then I think we can really radically shift. We need to upgrade our education systems. One of the greatest things that I ever did was leave school in the 9th grade. I never got taught what to think, but I learned how to think. And that's what the Chek system is. It's a system of how to solve problems using principles, not what to think. I think if we go to free energy technology, whatever we got to do that, and starve out these energy giants that are destroying the planet, and realize you can't vote to get change through the political system, it's too corrupt. You can only vote with your dollar. Only put your money into the companies and into the products that are sustainable, earth-friendly, whether it be hygiene, going to more efficient cars, whatever it is that we can do. I mean, I tell people all the time, look, there's almost 7 billion people on the planet. Imagine if all 7 billion people flush the toilet 1 less time a day. That would be, the average toilet flushes with 4 to 5 gallons of water. So if you take 7 billion times 4 gallons, that is a lake. That's enough water to sustain a lot of people and a lot of plants and a lot of farming. And it's only just one minor contribution from each person. So I feel it doesn't have to be that arduous. We each just have to do a little something every day that's a natural act of love and compassion and empathy for the world and for people. And we need to be more conscious of not buying into technologies that ultimately are part of the problem. And we need to really get clear on what it means to be alive and worship life and work together to create a mythology that has meaning, that really relates to the time and the era that we're in, because all these religions are 25-year-old outdated mythologies. So we need to upgrade our software, because consumerism is a mythological crutch that is killing the planet, ultimately because we're trying to fulfill an emptiness that can't be fulfilled through anything but worship and honest realization that we're living in a tremendous mystery. And look, even science plays stupid games with the mystery. Standard scientific models all start from the Big Bang, but none of them answers the question, what caused the Big Bang? So they're so anti-religion, anti-spirituality, yet they're doing the same thing and just pretending they're not. So the point I'm making is there's a grand mystery behind it all, and it's probably never going to be solved for a very simple reason. In order to solve that mystery, you have to go beyond duality. You have to go beyond subject-object. Whenever you're analyzing something as a scientist or a researcher, it's the object of your investigation. But to figure out what God is, you have to go past object, because you can't objectify the absolute. So in other words, you can't study a mystery with a mystery, because there's 2 subjective realities, and you can't make an object out of something that's absolute, God. Therefore, you can never really know what God is through any kind of objective assessment. You can only experience what it is, and the way we experience it is love. So if we really just ask the question repeatedly, whenever facing a challenge, what would love do now? And we're honest, we'll turn this whole thing around. I mean, it sounds a bit airy-fairy and hippie-like, but if you anyone meditates on that and practices just for one day, when someone cuts you off in traffic, what would love do now? If someone treats you poorly, what would love do now? If you have empathy and compassion and you see what you yourself have done to other people out of your own ignorance, and you say, okay, how can I acknowledge that this person's acting out a piece of me that I used to act out as a teenager or whatever? We can all start realizing the importance that we have for each other, for the planet. And we can realize that the most beautiful thing about God is that God cannot be recognized as this or that God is something special for everybody, and that there is no right or wrong. There's a question of, is it facilitating connection and meaning in your life? And is it producing ways of relating that ultimately are sustainable for the long run? Or is it starting wars? I mean, when you look into the 100 most polluting corporations in the world, something like 90 of them are all Christian. And I've researched this. So what do you see behind this so-called religious ideology is a bunch of people on boards of directors that are really after money and are willing to do whatever they got to do to get it, just like the Vatican's the richest corporation in the world. And they did it by corporatizing religion and telling you that as long as you put some money in the hat and follow the rules, you'll get to go to heaven. And the business model's so good, they don't have to give you anything because you don't get your reward until you're dead, which I think is, you know, and research shows that the Catholic Church had brainwashing mastered by the 8th century, and they've been perfecting it ever since. So what I'm saying is, when we get past all that kind of corporate money-driven, control-driven manipulation and say, what do we need to do together? Well, one, you have to be healthy enough to participate. So the day you take care of yourself and start loving yourself, you've already changed the world. If that's all you do, you've made the world a better place. But whenever we take care of ourselves and love ourselves, our level of energy rises and our level of awareness arises. And the next thing you know, you want to go help people, right? That's why you and I do what we do, isn't it?
So true. The
Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes, as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others, is a total game changer. Suddenly, you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com, and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
Spiritual teachers, Dr. David Hawkins said, as a daily practice, if you want to get to the highest levels of consciousness or awareness, be kind and loving to everyone and everything, including oneself, no matter what, will take you a long ways. And that's not an easy philosophy to practice and integrate in your life, but it's a good place to start. I want to finish this up and ask, how do people find out more about Paul Chek? Where do they start? How do they study with you? How do they become a Chek practitioner? How do they find out more and get involved with what you're doing and how you're transforming the planet?
Well, at chekinstitute.com, you can see all the programs. You can see all my online training programs. You know, there's a lot. Easy access is Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, which is for the public, how to get yourself healthy. It's based on my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, with additional information on practical application. That's right in our online training section on the homepage. My podcast, Living 4D with Paul Chek, which is what you were on. And thank you again, because I'm still getting amazing comments from that podcast. There's a tab right on the homepage, and you can see many genius people that I've interviewed and continue to interview. My PPS Success Mastery Program, which is a series of 12 lessons I put together based on the 12 most common roadblocks to feeling good and living a life that was inspiring to you, is at ppssuccess.com, and those lessons are online. And if you buy a lesson, I think you get 90 days to be on my bi-weekly coaching calls, where people can ask me any question they want about any of the lessons or challenges in their life. So it's a cheap way to get access to me for help, and the lessons have helped thousands of people. My YouTube channel has over 500 videos. I do pretty much a weekly video, and that's one of my ways of contributing to the world is public service. So that's youtube.com/Paul, Chek live, all stuck together, youtube.com/Paul Chek live. So there's a massive amount of information on all sorts of topics, from sex to cold showers to how to get over plantar fasciitis to, 7 A's of healing to, many series that I've done. Some of them are an hour or more long. None of my stuff's cheesy, flash in the pan, new age fluff. One of my biggest programs that we're still putting up, the first phase is up, which has the information about how to assess your archetypes and things like that, is the Chek 4-Quadrant Coaching Mastery Program. And that's in the online section of the Institute. So basically, ChekInstitute.com is sort of like the hub. We're a worldwide organization. We're all through Europe, South Pacific, United States. We have 13 instructors that travel the world teaching pretty much constantly. Like I said, there's over 10,000 Chek professionals out there at different levels of their training. So between my YouTube channel, my podcast, Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, and then entry level for the corrective and holistic exercise approach is the Chek Exercise Coach Program. And that you can find the prerequisites. All the information for each of the courses is right on the website. So it tells you what prerequisites need to be done, which you can get right through the Institute or do online. So today it takes about 7 years to complete all my training. There's, probably, I would guess, 50 people that have done all 7 years. Most of them are instructors now. And it's meant to be on-the-job training. It's not meant to be an academic rush to get a degree and then forget everything. It's really meant to be practical application. So it's kind of a practice and learn as you go at your own pace. And I encourage people, don't come to the next class till you actually have practiced and can naturally use and teach your previous class without having to think about it, or you're just going to get yourself in so deep that you'll just confuse yourself. So that's kind of it. If you search my name on Google, you'll probably get, like 3 million or 5 million hits. Don't remember, but it's a lot. And you can see that, I stir the pot everywhere I go, because a lot of people just really don't like my holistic approach or whatever, but that's just the nature of making change. So I think that's pretty much, you can find me through those resources. But I would say for anyone wanting to know, ChekInstitute.com is the place to go. And right now, in fact, we have a neat feature. We're doing a reimagine yourself. And my podcast, I did 2 solo podcasts. Right now, the one that's out takes you through all the structure stages of consciousness from the beginning of the evolution of man till now, and shows you the stages from archaic to magic to mythic to mental to integral. Only 2% of the world population is at integral, which is the highest level of consciousness, but integral holds the keys to healing our future. So I show you how those correlate to different regions of your body, different functions in your body, different functions of consciousness, and how that evolved. And then in part 2, I say, now here's the things you can do based on each structure stage. You can tell, if you have problems with your gut. And so the 2 podcasts actually give you a chance to truly understand holistic.
We'll put all these points inside the show notes so that people can get access to you. What a treat to have you here today. Boy, you know, I could go on forever, and I know we're going to follow up with another podcast later on. I just wanted to kind of introduce who Paul Chek is to our listeners and to our advocates that follow the Awesome Health formula. And what I believe is you've made such an impact in the world. You made such an impact to so many people, and you continue to do it, and you continue to integrate. And it's really remarkable, especially because, you know, saw your library and I saw the comprehensive, you're a student scholar. I mean, the breadth of information that you've been able to synthesize and integrate is really unique. And I encourage everybody who's listening, who wants to follow and pursue in the field of helping others through movement and better eating and understanding how our brains work and how consciousness integrates and manifests in the world, you've come to the right place. This is where you need to go. Go to Paul Chek, get integrated in the program, take him on as a mentor, follow this process. And I think when you talk about the changes that we need to make in the world to make the world a better place, if you're looking for the pathway, that's the pathway, because you've created the tools not as an indoctrination, but as a way of self-discovery and expansion into what it is to be a human here, having a spiritual being, having a human experience on the planet. And I'm delighted to have you here today. Thanks for taking so much time. We're going to bring you back to the show at a future date when time allows, as soon as we can. And of course, I'm looking forward to connecting as I get that move to Southern California coming up real quick. So it's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of great sharing.
Me too. And I'll say I'm a big fan of all your products, man. I'm more than over the moon with them, and everybody I've turned on to them is totally digging it. So, you know, me and you are birds of a feather, and I'm a big fan of all the Bioptimizers offerings, and I think they're beautiful. So that's what it's going to take, is a bunch of networking with people that really do have an interest in health and well-being and supporting people with stuff that really works. And so thank you for everything you give the world and have shared with me too.
Thank you very much, Paul. There you go, folks. Another Awesome Health podcast with Mr. Paul Chek. Check him out at the ChekInstitute.com. Get integrated, find out more, and take the deep dive that Paul Chek provides for you. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you want to connect into other podcasts, you can join us on the Awesome Health podcast. Go to awesomehealth.com or go to bioptimizers.com. It's right on the main street. You can check out all the great videos that we have there and people. And of course, make sure that you go and stop by Paul Chek, because he's a wealth of information that can really make a difference in your life, especially if you're struggling with patterns of behavior and you can't seem to make the change. You know what you need. You think you know what you need to do, but can't seem to make the change. Paul Chek's your guy. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care and have yourself an awesome day.
And now for a Bioptimizer's fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.